We're going in 3, 2, 1.
Yo, what up everyone? Tay here. And today's video is going to be a very long video because there is a bunch of stuff I want to talk about regarding all the different stuff that's come out over the last 2 weeks or so for Avengers Doomsday, but specifically Avengers Secret Wars. And hopefully you guys watched my last video on the Scarlet Witch and how she could be one of the most important characters, if not the most important character, in the upcoming Avengers movies and the entire multiverse saga. So hopefully you guys watch that one because definitely there's stuff in this video that kind of picks up with where we left off in that video. And because that video was actually originally a part of this video, there's just a few things from the 4 to 8 minute mark that kind of rehashes a little bit of what I covered in that video. So I'm going to add video chapters to this one, which I don't normally do. So if you want to skip past that point, you can. And one of the things I'm going to talk about in today's video that I talked about a little bit in the last video is I'm going to talk about some of that recent Avengers and Fantastic Four concept art that dropped earlier in the month, because that is something I haven't gotten a chance to really discuss yet. So there was a few images I talked about in the last video, and then today I will get to the other images that I haven't had a chance to get to yet. So it's not going to be the main topic of today's video, but I am going to use it as kind of a jumping off point to get into some of the deeper stuff of Avengers Secret Wars. And again, before you say anything, I know that the Russo brothers said in a recent interview that this concept art was not legit, but frankly, I think that's ridiculous because we know that this artist worked for Marvel Studios on past projects like Loki, She-Hulk, and Ms. Marvel. And we also know that Kevin Feige and the Russo brothers have no problem lying and have done so in the past when it comes to avoiding spoilers if they are asked a direct question in an interview. Also, I mean, within an hour of this art going viral, we know that Marvel Studios had this artist's entire ArtStation profile 404'd and pulled from the internet. So obviously, this is something they take very seriously. Now, at the same time, we still have to take the concept art with a grain of salt because it's concept art, it's not confirmation of anything, but I do still think that this concept art was a pretty big deal because what it does reveal to us is the different ideas and details and characters and just overall scope that Marvel Studios are looking to go with for these upcoming Avengers movies. Now, obviously, because I am going to be discussing some of this concept art, with that comes the potential for spoilers. So there is some minor spoilers for the Fantastic Four First Steps, and then some potentially bigger spoilers for the upcoming Avengers movies. So yep, just a quick fair spoiler warning for anyone that might not want to see that. And then lastly, don't forget to watch until the end of the video because we do have some long but really good super thanks questions to get to regarding some really good, interesting Avengers and Doctor Doom topics. One of the super thanks I really enjoyed, I thought made a really good point, but they're all good stuff. So yeah, watch until the end of the video because there is good super thanks. And then to all of you watching, remember that if you would like to leave a super thanks with a question or a comment on this video, that those really help out the channel a lot and are greatly appreciated, and that I will read and respond to those in the next video.
Again, the 12-year-old in us, this would have been the greatest thing that ever happened is we got to, get immersed in, a 20-movie arc and see an ending to that arc. What's compelling about these two new Avengers movies is they're a beginning. It's a new beginning. Yeah. So we told an ending story, now we're going to tell a beginning story, and then who knows where we'll go from there.
All right, so before we get too deep into discussing the new updates for Avengers Secret Wars, first, let's quickly scan through some of the Avengers and Fantastic Four concept art that dropped earlier this month. And I already talked about the Young Avengers and Star-Lord and Vision images in the last video, so I'll skip past those to this image, because out of all the images that released, this was the one that, in my opinion, stood out the most. And this image was titled Royal Court, where we see a depiction of Doctor Doom as God Emperor Doom on his throne, surrounded by his loyal subjects, which appears to be a direct adaptation from Hickman's Secret Wars comic. However, there is one thing I need to talk about that I discussed in the last video that I need to rehash real quick because it ties into something I'm going to talk about later. And that is how most people seem to be assuming that the woman we see in this concept art is Sue Storm, because of course Sue Storm was Doctor Doom's Battleworld wife in the comics. And what I talked about in the last video is how I actually think that the woman we see in this art looks much more like Elizabeth Olsen than Vanessa Kirby as Sue Storm. And we can even see that she has more reddish blonde hair than like yellow blonde hair. So I think it's possible that this might be meant to be a depiction of Elizabeth Olsen as Wanda with her hair pulled up. And of course, this being Wanda would make a ton of sense because of all the rumors and reports we've heard recently about Wanda being involved in some kind of romantic relationship and teaming up with Doctor Doom in the upcoming Avengers movies. However, regardless of who the woman is, I definitely think that the kid we see in this concept art is meant to be Franklin Richards, because we've heard all these reports about Franklin Richards playing a very important role in the upcoming Avengers movies, on top of the fact that we also know, because of this recent Fantastic Four art that was also released in this batch, that Franklin Richards will almost certainly be at the center of the plot of the Fantastic Four movie, and that a part of that will likely revolve around Galactus trying to get Franklin Richards because he wants to use Franklin Richards' powers to recreate his old universe. So yeah, basically, a big part of Doctor Doom's plan in Avengers Doomsday could be to get Franklin Richards away from his parents so that he can influence his young mind and use his abilities and his powers to recreate a new universe or a new sacred timeline. And obviously Doom using Franklin to create some kind of new universe would be a huge deal for the plot of the upcoming Avengers movies. But one of the reasons I wanted to bring it up again in this video is because not only would this be really important as far as what's happening with Franklin and Doctor Doom, but I also think that this plotline could have a very big effect on everything that's happening in the Secret Wars movies, and that it could also make Reed Richards into one of the main characters of these upcoming Avengers films, and could set him up to have that primary antagonist role against Doctor Doom, just like what we saw in Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars comics. Because, I mean, think about it. If this were to happen, then Reed wouldn't just be fighting to defeat Doctor Doom in order to save the multiverse, but he would also, more importantly, be fighting to save his son from Doctor Doom's influence. Now, we're going to come back to this art and Reed Richards' role in the movie in a second, but first I just wanted to touch on two more images from this new batch. And the first is this one, which was titled as Hulk Village, where we see Bruce Banner's Hulk, She-Hulk, and who I'm assuming is Scar, in this medieval village that includes several other Hulk-like beings throughout the background. And what this image immediately made me think of was an area of Battleworld from the comics called Greenland that was exposed to gamma radiation and turned many of its inhabitants into Hulks and various Hulk-like mutations. And introducing Greenland into the MCU, or something close to Greenland, would obviously be the perfect way to introduce the Maestro and his army of Worldbreaker Hulks, which, of course, we've heard various rumors about. And if you haven't caught on yet, the reason that all of these images are showing these crazy character pairings in this crazy quasi-medieval setting is because this is clearly concept art that is meant to depict what will be the MCU's version of Battleworld. And when this concept art first went viral, originally everyone was assuming that these were images for Avengers Doomsday. But considering that most of these images seem to be depictions of Battleworld, I think it's much, much more likely that these are actually designs meant for Avengers Secret Wars and not Avengers Doomsday. Because obviously, before we can get to Battleworld in the Secret Wars movie, first we have to see the incursions and the multiversal war and how exactly Battleworld will come into existence. And that's largely what I expect Avengers Doomsday will be about. You know, the journey of how exactly Doom will become the new god of the multiverse and rule over the MCU's version of Battleworld. However, one thing to note is that a lot of this concept art is like very medieval. You know, it kind of reminds me a lot of the 1602 episode of What If. And while there definitely are a lot of medieval aspects to Battleworld in the comics, it also has a lot of modern and futuristic elements to it as well. You know, it's almost like a mix of Game of Thrones meets Star Wars. And I expect that that is probably more what it'll be like in the Secret Wars movie, to where it'll probably be a mix of both medieval and futuristic elements instead of just this purely medieval setting like we are seeing in this concept art. But anyways, then the other image I wanted to bring up real quick is this one. Because in this image, we see a depiction of who appears to be Damson Idris as a new version of Black Panther. And from what I saw, it looked like a lot of people online were assuming that this was concept art for Black Panther 3. However, if you saved these images off the artist page before it was taken down, each image included a title and an abbreviation that indicated what project it was for. And the file names for these different Black Panther images actually indicated that these are designs for one of the upcoming Avengers movies and not Black Panther 3. And that definitely stood out to me because for a while now, I've theorized that we will likely see some kind of Black Panther variant in one of the upcoming Avengers movies because T'Challa was a character that played a very important role in both Hickman's Time Runs Out and Secret Wars comics. However, what I speculated on in the past was that maybe we could see a variant of T'Chaka or maybe even another variant of Eric Killmonger. But these images are not titled as either of those. These images were saved under the name T'Chanda. And in the comics, T'Chanda, who's also known as Azuri the Wise, was actually T'Challa's grandfather. Now again, we can't jump to conclusions because this is concept art, it's not confirmation. But maybe we will actually see a new Black Panther variant in one of the upcoming Avengers movies, but instead of it being a variant of T'Challa or T'Chaka, it will actually be a young variant of T'Chanda who is from another universe, who could at some point team up with the Avengers in the fight against Doctor Doom and play a similar role to the one that T'Challa had in the Secret Wars comic. I mean, of course, it's too early to tell for sure, but just the fact that this concept art exists and it was created for one of the upcoming Avengers movies is pretty interesting and revealing in and of itself. So yeah, now that we've gone through some of the other images that I didn't have a chance to discuss in yesterday's video, now let's move on and get into the good stuff where we can get deep into the weeds and go down the rabbit hole on all of the big crazy Avengers updates that have come out recently and what all of this could mean for the plot of Avengers Secret Wars, as well as what'll be happening with Reed Richards, Doctor Doom, and the potential Battleworld Resistance.
As both universes hurl towards each other on a path to collision, the heroes of both planets attempt to save their respective worlds by any means necessary. From brute force to sentinels to the Phoenix Force. But nothing can stop this incursion of worlds, and all known realities cease to exist. One reality remains, Battleworld, a patchwork of lands encompassing different salvaged realities of the Marvel multiverse. There, Doom rules with an iron fist and face as the shaper of reality. He rules as a living god with Sue Storm and her children by his side, enforcing his will through his sheriff, Stephen Strange, with the help of his army of Thors known as the Thor Corps.
Alright, so like I talked about in the last section, it's very clear that the majority of this Avengers art is directly inspired by Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars comic and Battleworld. So to talk about what could happen in the Secret Wars movie, first we have to do a quick rundown of what happened in the comics. Because I'm sure there are some of you out there wondering why in this image we see heroes like Doctor Strange and Yelena who appear to be working with Doctor Doom instead of opposing him. And when I saw this image in particular, I gotta admit, I was pretty stoked because it's a huge hint at something that I've talked about a lot lately, and that is the possibility that in Avengers Doomsday, we could actually see Doctor Strange working with Doctor Doom to help him in his plan to save the multiverse. Because as most of you know, at the end of the Time Runs Out comic, we see Doctor Strange teaming up with Doctor Doom and Owen Reese in order to help them defeat the Beyonders, as they were the root cause of the incursions. And so while the final incursion and the big multiversal war was going on back on Earth 616, Doctor Doom, Strange, and Molecule Man were in the boundary outside of the multiverse, playing out Doom's plan to defeat the Beyonders and steal their power so that they could use that power to create a new universe. And the original plan was for Doctor Doom and Strange to create this universe together. But when the moment came and all of that omnipotent power was at their fingertips, Doctor Strange froze up in fear and was unable to do anything. So Doctor Doom had to step up and take over completely, and what he did is he used fragments from dozens of different shattered universes across the multiverse to create Battleworld as the one singular reality left in existence. And so this is why after Battleworld was created, that Doctor Doom was the one who became its God King, and why Doctor Strange was the one that became his sheriff and right-hand man. And when Battleworld was created, it didn't just suck in pieces of different shattered universes, but it also brought in tons of variants from all of those different universes. So when we get to the Secret Wars comic, what we end up seeing is that there's tons of characters that we actually saw die during the incursions who were then reborn on Battleworld. But the problem is that besides Doctor Doom, Doctor Strange, and Molecule Man, none of those other characters who were recreated on Battleworld had any memory of events like the incursions, or really just any aspect of what their life was like before Battleworld in the previous multiverse. So that's why we end up seeing characters that are both villains and heroes that are now working for Doctor Doom, because to them, Doctor Doom is the God King, and it's just always been that way. And it looks like we might see the same thing playing out in the Secret Wars movie with someone like Yelena serving Doctor Doom like we see in this concept art. Now again, this art doesn't mean that it's confirmed that Yelena will be one of the characters that will be working for Doctor Doom in the Secret Wars movie, but it does give us a big hint that the Russo brothers are at least looking at using that same concept and idea in the movie of heroes serving Doctor Doom just like they did in the comics. However, even though Yelena could be replaced with any number of different characters in that role in the actual movie, the fact that we see both Doctor Strange and Franklin Richards standing beside Doom in this concept art does make me think that it is very likely that Doctor Strange will be working with Doom in Avengers Doomsday and at least part of Avengers Secret Wars, and that Franklin will also play a very big role in Doctor Doom's overall plan, just like everything I talked about in the last video. Now, obviously, I'm not going to go through all of that again since I did just cover that in the last one, so if you haven't seen that yet, you should definitely check it out. It's linked in the description. But what I do want to talk about in greater detail is Reed Richards. Because the fact that Reed Richards is the character that we see on his knees before Doom in this concept art is very telling to me and does seem like more than just a random character choice, and that this could actually be a bigger hint at some of the bigger story elements that we will see in both Avengers Doomsday and especially Avengers Secret Wars. Because if we go back to the Time Runs Out comic, as the incursions were becoming more and more of a threat to Earth 616, Reed Richards and the Future Foundation started constructing a multiversal life raft, which was this giant spaceship basically that was capable of multiversal travel and was meant to be used as a last resort in case of an unstoppable incursion so that they could evacuate as many people off-world as possible. And later, when that final incursion occurred in Secret Wars issue number 1, when it was clear that there was no stopping it, the Fantastic Four and T'Challa and several other heroes tried to evacuate as many heroes as they could. But in the end, with all the chaos going on, they were only able to get a handful of people on the actual ship. And as they were taking off, the hull of the ship was struck by lightning coming off of the incursion point, and the compartment that was carrying the Fantastic Four and Reed Richards' family was knocked loose. And we see this horrible moment where Reed Richards tries to grab them, but the ship kicks into hyperspeed before he could reach them. And this is one of the most devastating moments of the whole Secret Wars story, where we see Reed Richards forced to stand by and watch as his entire family and team die in that final incursion, and there's nothing he can do about it. And after this, we see the characters are basically lost to the emptiness of what used to be the multiverse, only to wake up on Battleworld 8 years later. Because what happened after that is after their life raft took off, it eventually crash landed on Battleworld where it was found by Doctor Strange. And when Doctor Strange found it, he recognized that it was a ship that was not from Battleworld, but he was nervous about opening it because he didn't know who might be inside and if they could be villains that might be a threat to Doctor Doom's rule. So he just stored the ship away inside of his Battleworld sanctum until he finally opened it 8 years later. And the specific characters that were on board the life raft that actually survived the final incursion were Peter Parker, Carol Danvers, Jane Foster, Scott Summers, Peter Quill, T'Challa, and of course Reed Richards. And when Doctor Strange finally opens the door to this ship that he's had for 8 years, he's of course shocked to see that not only are these people that he knows from his home universe, but that they actually remember the incursions and what the multiverse was like before Battleworld. So yeah, Doctor Strange is basically in shock, but of course all of the characters on board the ship are just pissed off and want answers about what's going on. So Doctor Strange starts to fill them in on everything that happened after the final incursion and how Battleworld was created and that Doctor Doom is now its God King. And this is of course a huge shock to all of them, but the biggest shock is when Reed Richards finds out that not only is his family now alive, but that they had no memory of him and that Doctor Doom had basically stolen his entire life and made Reed's family his family. And this is something that happens like halfway through the Secret Wars comic, and it's a big turning point for the story. Because for 8 years now, Doctor Strange has been Doctor Doom's best friend and right-hand man, and even though he's disagreed with a lot of Doom's methods and what he's done, he's still agreed to just stay by his side and stay loyal. But now that Doctor Strange is around his old friends and characters that remember what life was like before Battleworld, he started to realize that this is his chance to possibly help overthrow Doctor Doom and restore proper order to the multiverse. Because up to this point in different spin-off comics, we see that there are other uprisings across Battleworld from characters who want to overthrow Doctor Doom, but Doctor Strange never joined any of those uprisings because he knew that none of them were smart enough or powerful enough to actually get the job done. But now that his old friends are back like T'Challa and Reed Richards, he knew there was a chance, especially with Reed, because Reed was one of the only men that Doctor Doom truly feared because he knew deep down that Reed wasn't only smarter than he was, but that he was also a better man than he was. In fact, when Battleworld was first created, Doctor Doom scoured the entire planet to ensure that there were no variants of Reed Richards out there because he knew that any version of Reed would be a threat to his rule. So now that Doctor Strange had Reed and the rest of his old heroic friends, he knew that this was their moment to make a move against Doctor Doom. So what Strange did is he used his magic to send each member of this party to a different area of Battleworld where there was already dissension so that they could raise a resistance army of different crazy multiversal characters to march on Castle Doom and hopefully defeat him. And look, I know that was like a long preamble of going through what happened in the comics, but after seeing this concept art, I really think there's a strong chance that some version of that plotline from that story could be a huge part of what we will see happen in the Secret Wars movie. So yeah, now that we've set all that up, now let's move on and talk about how that specifically could happen and how that could go down with Reed Richards and this Multiversal Resistance Battleworld Avengers team.
New mask. Same task. What can I tell you? I like playing complicated characters.
Alright, so as we've discussed in past videos, regardless of whatever happens in Avengers Doomsday, it seems like there's a really good chance that the movie will end with the MCU 616 universe, and probably like the entire multiverse, somehow being destroyed with an incursion or some kind of catastrophic event, only for it to all be replaced with the creation of a new universe or even a new version of the sacred timeline. And based on this new concept art, I think there's a good chance that we could see the ending of Avengers Doomsday being very similar to what happened in the comics, where the majority of the cast will probably end up dying in this catastrophic event, but that we could see just a small group of survivors who will retain their memories, while the vast majority of other characters will then go on to be reborn into the next universe for Avengers Secret Wars, but will likely have no memory of what happened in Avengers Doomsday or anything in the past of the MCU up to that point. And if something like this is what happens, then whoever those characters are that survive the events of Avengers Doomsday will most likely go on to be the lead characters of the Secret Wars movie, just like we saw in the comics, and also very similar to how the core Avengers team were the lead characters in Avengers Endgame to do the time heist to get the Infinity Stone. And obviously we know that the Secret Wars movie is going to have a gigantic cast. I mean, it'll likely be the largest ensemble cast we've ever seen in an MCU movie ever. But if the movie largely occurs within Battleworld, then in all likelihood the majority of that cast will probably be made up of multiversal variants and characters from the MCU 616 universe who were reborn on Battleworld but lost their memories. In fact, in a recent scoop by Alex Perez, he basically said this same thing, that based on what he's heard about Avengers Secret Wars, that there will be a small group of characters that survived the events of Avengers Doomsday, but that the bulk of the characters will be those who have been reborn on Battleworld without their memories. And if this is true, then this basically gives us a general idea of what the overall storyline for the Secret Wars movie will be. That the basic plot could revolve around a small group of assorted characters who are trying to raise a resistance army or a resistance Avengers team so that they have some backup to defeat Doctor Doom and then reset the multiverse. Now, that's a little overly simplistic, and I'm not saying that will be the only plot premise, but that could definitely be kind of what's at the center of the story. So again, if that is the general idea of what's going to happen in the movie, then this brings up the question of which characters will end up surviving the events in Avengers Doomsday in order to lead this resistance army of Battleworld Avengers. Well, of course, there's no way of knowing for sure because there's just so many options for the Russo brothers to choose from. And I also think there's a good chance that a lot of that cast and a lot of the cameos and characters that we will see in the movie will also just depend on who Marvel Studios can get on set. But based on who will be the leading characters, you know, those surviving characters that cross over from Avengers Doomsday with their memories intact, I think we can make a pretty educated guess on at least who a few of those characters will be based on everything we know about Phase 6 and all of the other information and reports we've heard regarding Marvel Studios' bigger plans for these Avengers films. Like, for instance, I think there's a good chance that Peter Parker could be one of these characters because we know that Spider-Man 4 is going to be coming out in between Doomsday and Secret Wars, and that according to reports, it's not going to be a prequel or take place in the past, and that it will occur after the events of Doomsday, but before the events of Secret Wars in that Phase 6 timeline. And with that being the case, I really doubt that Marvel Studios would end Avengers Doomsday with Peter losing his memories, because the past events from No Way Home are likely going to be central to Peter's character development in Spider-Man 4, as he deals with the grief of losing Ned and MJ and, of course, Aunt May. But besides Spider-Man, there's also characters that I could see being a part of that surviving team because they have certain powers or MacGuffins that could be central elements to the story. Like, for instance, I wouldn't be surprised if Shang-Chi or Ms. Marvel are a part of that surviving cast, as they have the 10 rings and one of the quantum bands, which are powerful relics that could be important MacGuffins in the overall plan to defeat Doctor Doom. And we also know that Carol Danvers has the other quantum band, so she could be a part of it as well. Or I could also see America Chavez possibly being involved because of her powers over multiversal travel. That could somehow be written into the overall plot of the story. And then, even though they aren't from the MCU 616 universe, I think there will probably also be different multiversal characters thrown into this mix of surviving characters as well, like Deadpool or Wolverine, or maybe some other X-Men characters that we see introduced in Avengers Doomsday. Because something else that's been reported on recently is that Monica Rambeau could have an important role in Avengers Doomsday because she could be the character that will unite the X-Men from the universe we saw at the end of the Marvels to get those characters and that Multiversal X-Men team to work with the 616 Avengers during the Multiversal War. However, based on this new Avengers concept art, I think that two of the characters that could lead this resistance movement in Avengers Secret Wars are probably Doctor Strange and Reed Richards. Because, as I've said before, if Doctor Strange ends up working with Doom in Avengers Doomsday, then it seems like the Russo brothers would only make that decision if they had a bigger plan in place for Strange to then turn on Doom to help overthrow him in the next movie. But the Reed Richards plot is where I think things could get really interesting, because Doom and Reed's relationship was really the story that was at the heart of the Secret Wars comic. And originally, I wasn't sure if Marvel Studios were going to be able to explore Doctor Doom and the Fantastic Four's complex relationship very much in the upcoming Avengers films, because of course, the Fantastic Four won't be introduced until the very beginning of Phase 6. However, now that it's looking more and more likely that Franklin Richards will be a big part of what Doctor Doom's plan is, I really do think that he will be the bigger key to unlocking that complex conflict between Reed and Doom. Because I do think that certain elements of Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars will mirror certain elements of Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. And one of the main ways I think it's obvious that they will mirror each other is that Avengers Doomsday will likely end with Doctor Doom being victorious, the same way that Thanos came out as the victorious one at the end of Avengers Infinity War. And then after that, the plot of Avengers Secret Wars will likely revolve around the characters that survived the events of Avengers Doomsday, trying to figure out how to reverse what Doctor Doom did and to reset the multiverse. And I do think that that will be somewhat similar to what we saw in Avengers Endgame, where we saw the heroes who survived the snap having to travel back in time to collect the Infinity Stones from the past so that they could use those to reverse what Thanos had done in Infinity War. So the big MacGuffin in Infinity War were, of course, the Infinity Stones. And throughout the events of Doomsday and Secret Wars, I think we will probably see a few different MacGuffins coming into play, like potentially the 10 Rings and the Quantum Bands. But overall, I think that the main MacGuffins of these movies probably won't be objects or relics, they'll be characters. Or more specifically, the powers that certain characters possess. And I think that those characters could be Franklin Richards and Wanda Maximoff. And that instead of Doctor Doom's plan hinging on the power of Molecule Man and the Beyonders like it did in the comics, that in Avengers Doomsday, Doom's plan could be dependent on the powers of Franklin Richards and the Scarlet Witch. And that could be why we see who appears to be both Franklin and potentially Wanda standing at Doom's side in this concept art, because after he is successful in his plans in Avengers Doomsday, Wanda could become his wife and Franklin their child. Because, as we know from WandaVision and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, the thing that Wanda longs for more than anything is kids and a family. So if this theory is accurate, then what we could see happen in Avengers Secret Wars is instead of a small group of surviving Avengers going after the Infinity Stones to undo the snap like we saw in Avengers Endgame, instead we could see a small group of heroes who survived the destruction of the multiverse in Avengers Doomsday who are now in Battleworld and have to come up with a plan to get Franklin and Wanda away from Doctor Doom and make them remember who they really are so that they can get their help in defeating Doom and resetting the multiverse. So with that in mind, you have to think of which characters would Stephen McFeely and the Russo brothers choose from to be a part of that mission and get it done. You know, which characters are the closest to Wanda and Franklin and could reach out to them in a way that would break that spell. Well, obviously, as we've been talking about, Reed and any other Fantastic Four characters would be the best in regards for the whole Franklin storyline. And then as far as Wanda goes, I think that Doctor Strange would make sense because he knows Wanda and is a master of the mystic arts. I also think that Clint Barton would make sense if Jeremy Renner ends up appearing in Secret Wars. Or obviously, two of the characters that would especially make sense are Tommy and Billy, or at least Billy. If Billy's in the movie, that would definitely make a lot of sense. However, the main character that would seem the most likely to be able to break through to Wanda would probably be Vision. And I gotta admit that originally I wasn't sure if Vision would even be in either of the upcoming Avengers films, because Kevin Feige has already said that there won't be room for every MCU character in these movies. So I was just a little bit slightly surprised to see Vision in this Avengers concept art, where it kind of makes it look like he could be Battleworld roommates with Star-Lord. Now again, I have to remind everyone that just because we see something in this concept art doesn't mean we'll necessarily see it in the movie. However, what this concept art does tell us is that Vision is a character that the Russo brothers are at least considering to somehow be involved in these films. And now that I think about it, honestly, it kind of actually makes a lot of sense, because if Wanda is going to play a huge, crucial role in these films, then Vision's involvement could end up being a necessary part of the puzzle to kind of help break Wanda free. So yeah, overall, there was a lot of different aspects and things you can read into this concept art, a lot of different possibilities, but one of the biggest takeaways I had from this overall is that it looks like Marvel and the Russo brothers are not going to hold back in going full in, over the top, on just how grand everything is going to be with Battleworld, somewhat similar and just as crazy as what we saw in the comics. I mean, maybe not just as crazy, but it looks like they are definitely going for it. But anyways, before we go, there's still one more thing I want to discuss regarding some of the recent updates we've heard regarding the identity of Doctor Doom in the upcoming Avengers movies.
Wow. And then one day, Steve McFeely, who's one of our key collaborators, said, I have an idea. And he called us and pitched, and we went, that's the story. That story has to be told. It's a really powerful story. And the one thing I will say about the movie is this. We love villains who think they're the heroes of their own stories. That's when they become three-dimensional and when they become more interesting. And when you have an actor like Robert Downey, you have to create a well-shaped, three-dimensional character for the audience. That's where a lot of our focus is going.
All right, so in the last section, I was talking a little bit about the different ways that Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars could mirror certain elements of Infinity War and Endgame. However, based on some of the recent comments made by the Russo brothers, I actually think that certain plot elements won't just mirror elements of those movies, but that the backstory of Doctor Doom could actually tie in to certain events that occurred in those movies, specifically in Avengers Endgame. Because recently, the Russo brothers have been doing a lot of media for their new movie, Electric State. And in these interviews, inevitably, they always end up getting asked at least a few questions about the upcoming Avengers films. And in one of those interviews, they were asked about why they are bringing back Robert Downey Jr. to play Doctor Doom, and how exactly that's going to work, considering that Robert Downey Jr. played Tony Stark and that Tony Stark died at the end of Avengers Endgame. And interestingly, Anthony Russo said that they couldn't answer that question because that would be a spoiler, because the answer ties into Doctor Doom's backstory and story arc, and how he'll come to exist in the MCU. And this response honestly surprised me, because you would think they would just say, hey, look, we can't talk about that at all, because no matter what we say, will kind of be a spoiler or a hint at what our plan is. And that is kind of what Anthony said, but the way he answered that question was kind of an answer in and of itself. Because if Tony Stark's death in Avengers Endgame ties into the backstory of Doctor Doom and how he will be introduced into the MCU, then this would seem to at least heavily imply that Doctor Doom is in fact somehow tied to Tony Stark. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up before we ended the video is because two of the Super Thanks questions I got from the last couple of videos from Steve James and Happy Dance were specifically asking me what I thought about Doctor Doom's true identity and some of the different rumors and reports we've heard regarding Doctor Doom, and whether or not I think he will be some kind of Tony Stark variant, or if he will actually just be Victor Von Doom, who just happens to be played by Robert Downey Jr. And I'm still going to read those super thanks when we get to the super thanks at the end of the video, but I thought I would just kind of address the answers to those questions right now. Because ever since Robert Downey Jr. was revealed to be playing Doctor Doom back at Comic-Con, I've always said that I thought it was most likely that Doom will have some kind of connection to Tony Stark, because otherwise the fact that he's played by the same actor will just be too confusing for general audiences. And I know that whenever this comes up, people always point to the fact that Joe Russo referred to Doctor Doom as Victor Von Doom back at Comic-Con as proof that he is just playing the regular old Doctor Doom. However, in my opinion, that doesn't mean too much, because if Doom's identity is somehow tied to Tony Stark, or he is a Tony Stark variant that has somehow become Doctor Doom, then obviously they will probably save that moment to be revealed in a sort of big plot twist at some point in one of the upcoming Avengers movies. So if Doom's identity and why he looks like Tony Stark is being saved for this big reveal in one of those movies, then it kind of forces the Russo brothers to just refer to him as Victor if it comes up, because they're not going to want to say anything that's going to spoil that surprise. Now, that's not to say that I couldn't still see Robert Downey Jr. just playing Victor Von Doom. You know, that could be what's happening as well. I just feel like the Tony Stark angle is a bit more likely. Now, as far as what the plot twist could be that does reveal Doom's true identity, right now we can only theorize on that. But, you know, some of the obvious theories out there are that Doom could be a variant of Tony Stark that went down a dark path and ended up taking on the identity of Doctor Doom. Or another obvious option is that Victor Von Doom could be using a spell of some kind to basically possess a version of Tony Stark, because that is something we've seen happen in the comics where Victor Von Doom and Tony Stark switched bodies. So yeah, there's all sorts of different possibilities of how that could happen. But with Anthony Russo saying that the death of Tony Stark in Endgame is somehow connected to Doctor Doom's backstory, we now have at least a small clue at what his true identity could be. Or, you know, at least some little bit of information to go on. And something I keep thinking about regarding this is the scene we saw in Avengers Endgame that happens shortly after Thanos attacks the Avengers complex, when Tony tells Steve, when you mess with time, it tends to mess back.
What happened? If you mess with time, it tends to mess back. You'll see.
And one of the reasons I've always thought that that line from Tony was very interesting is because it seemed to be dialogue that was included as a means to foreshadow some kind of future event that would come back around and explain exactly what Tony meant at some point in a future project. And with Stephen McFeely and the Russo brothers being the ones who wrote the scripts for the upcoming Avengers movies, I wouldn't be surprised if they did tie certain elements of those scripts for Doomsday and Secret Wars back into their own work from the past with movies like Infinity War and Endgame. So, I mean, I guess the bigger point I'm trying to get at is that maybe how and why Doctor Doom exists will somehow tie back around into what happened in Avengers Endgame, just like Anthony Russo suggested. That with everything that happened with the Avengers traveling back in time and messing with the Infinity Stones, and then with Tony Stark being the one to use the Infinity Stones to get rid of Thanos and his army, that maybe the existence of RDJ's Doctor Doom is somehow tied to those events. That, you know, basically something the Avengers did in that movie with all the time travel and all the messing with the Infinity Stones had some kind of butterfly effect that rippled throughout the time stream and throughout the multiverse and somehow led to a Tony Stark Doctor Doom variant of some kind. Because according to the Russos, after they first met with Marvel Studios about coming back to direct the upcoming Avengers movies, they went and had some discussions with Stephen McFeely about writing the scripts. And they said that it wasn't actually until several months later that they actually agreed to direct these movies, because according to them, Stephen McFeely had come up with some great idea for Doctor Doom and the overall plot of the movie that would tie it back around into multiple corners of the MCU, including stuff that happened back in the Infinity Saga, and also elements that ties into what's happened so far in the Multiverse Saga. And look, with Anthony Russo saying that Doctor Doom's backstory is somehow connected to Tony Stark's death in Avengers Endgame, that can be interpreted in many different ways. However, something that I keep thinking about is how after Tony used the Infinity Gauntlet to snap away all of Thanos' forces, is how, yes, it killed him, but that it also left him with these burn scars on the entire right side of his body. Because, as we know, a key characteristic of Doctor Doom is that he's covered in scars, and that's why he wears his face mask. Now, in the comics, Doom originally got his scars because he was building a machine to try and rescue his mother from hell, and when he tested it, the machine blew up in his face. However, considering this possibility that Doom might actually be some kind of Tony Stark variant, or somehow connected to Tony Stark, what if in the MCU, Doom's scars are actually caused by the Infinity Stones? That what if there was a Tony Stark variant that was from a different timeline, and he used the Infinity Stones to stop Thanos just like the 616 Tony did, but that this Tony variant somehow survived the snap, but that it left him with scarring covering half of his body? Because there's a lot of ways that an event like that could somehow lead to this variant becoming or taking on the identity of Doctor Doom. Like maybe one possibility is that when this Tony variant does the snap, he could have some kind of dark vision that's caused by the Infinity Stones that warps his mind and corrupts his soul. Or that maybe the snap could have somehow swapped out Tony's soul with the soul of Victor Von Doom. I mean, I don't know, I'm just throwing out different possibilities, but I'm just saying that I do think that the Infinity Stones being what causes Doctor Doom's scars and possibly even warping his mind is a real possibility. Plus, obviously, a storyline like this would also make it easier for Doctor Doom to get certain heroes like Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, and Wanda to trust him, which obviously I know I'm not the first person to say this, but with Doctor Doom having the face of Tony Stark, that would definitely help explain why certain characters like that would be willing to trust him, because he would appear like the man they already knew. And if it then turned out that Doctor Doom didn't only look like Tony, but that he actually is a Tony variant from another universe who got his scars because of the snap and the Infinity Stones, but that unlike Tony from the 616 universe, he somehow survived, that would probably go a very long way in even further building trust with these heroes, because they would now assume that this Tony variant is the same good man that the 616 Tony was, because he was willing to make that same sacrifice to save his world from Thanos, but that he got lucky and it only left him scarred and disfigured instead of taking his life. And since he was willing to make that sacrifice to save his world, this could be what leads to them believing that he is right about how to save the multiverse in taking out other universes to do so. And of course, we have heard a lot of reports and scoops saying that Robert Downey Jr.'s Doctor Doom is going to originally be from the same universe that the Fantastic Four are from, which is obviously something that would make sense because it could help set up that backstory of how Doctor Doom and the Fantastic Four could share some kind of past relationship. So, another kind of speculation is that maybe it could be revealed that the Fantastic Four and Robert Downey Jr.'s Doctor Doom were once friends and that they actually fought against Thanos together, but then after the snap, it somehow corrupted Doom's mind and turned him against the Fantastic Four. Because I remember that a few months ago, there were some rumors that were floating around online that said that Doctor Doom's backstory in the MCU was going to be that he is from the same universe as the Fantastic Four, and that in that universe it will be revealed that he was a war hero who helped defeat Hydra, and that in that universe Thanos actually attacked Earth back in the 1950s, and that Doctor Doom would have been the central character responsible for defeating him. Now, like I said, that's just a rumor, so of course we have to take it with a grain of salt, but I do think that tying Doom's backstory into the Infinity Stones would be a cool way to sort of tie his character into the events of what happened in Avengers Endgame, whether he is a Tony variant or truly is just Victor Von Doom. So yeah, you guys let me know what you think about this in the comments down below, because at this point I know pretty much everyone has their own Doctor Doom theory on how all of this is going to play out. And a lot of them are really good and seem totally plausible. That's one of the crazy things about this character and this casting, is that there's all sorts of ways to where they could explain his backstory that would actually be really cool and would make sense because it's the multiverse saga, so it kind of allows them ultimate freedom in how they can play this out. So yeah, leave your own theories in the comments down below, and please like and share the video to help feed that algorithm, if you enjoyed it, of course. But don't go anywhere just yet, because we still have a few super thanks to get to. So let's get to those.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's jump into these super thanks. And the first one we have is 5 from the ever reliable Gator Chris. Thank you, Chris. Then we also have 10 from Mio. I don't know how to say your name, bro, but and this one says, first off, I want to say rest in heaven to my best friend Ron. He passed a couple of days ago, and he was a huge fan of the MCU. Also, I've been watching you for years. You make the best content in this space. But my question is, what would your ideal X-Men team for the MCU be after the multiverse saga? Well, first off, dude, really sorry to hear about your buddy Ron. Yeah, I've lost multiple friends over the years, and it always hits super hard, even if you haven't seen them in a long time. And then as far as which X-Men characters I would like to see, what I hope is that Marvel Studios really takes a lot of influence from the John Byrne's X-Men comics of the 80s, and also some of the better Jonathan Hickman X-Men comics. That's my personal hope more than anything over specific characters. But one thing I will admit that I'm a little worried about is that Marvel Studios may not introduce a new version of Wolverine in the first X-Men movie they do, because it sounds like they still want to do at least one more Deadpool and Wolverine sequel after the multiverse saga is over. And if that happens, I'm sure that will be a multiversal movie. That way they don't have to worry about explaining how the new X-Men characters are all on the younger side, and then they have this older version of Wolverine. But also, if they do that, I'm worried that they will then wait to introduce a new MCU version of Wolverine until they're finished doing all this stuff they want to do with Hugh Jackman. So yeah, thanks for the super thanks, dude, and again, sorry about your friend. And then the next two we have are two of the ones I saved because they're both related to Doctor Doom. So the first one we have is from Steve James 7930, and this one says, "Hey Tay, cool video mate, hope you're well. Like many, I assumed that Robert Downey Jr.'s Doom was going to be a Tony Stark variant, but the Russos referred to him as Victor, and now we're hearing that he may be staying after Secret Wars. What if RDJ is playing the actual Victor Von Doom this whole time, and the 616 is just the universe where the Doom family left Latveria/Sokovia to live in America as the Starks? Maybe Kang messed with the timeline to prevent Doctor Doom from happening as he feared him, and now he's gone, so Doom is here." And as far as Joe Russo referring to Doctor Doom as Victor back at Comic-Con, I already addressed that a few minutes ago, but to make it clear, it is still possible that he could just be Victor. I'm just saying that I think the Tony angle makes a little bit more sense. And depending on how his story ends at the end of Avengers Secret Wars, I could definitely see Doctor Doom being a character that sticks around in the MCU for a while afterwards. I think it just depends on Robert Downey Jr. and how expensive his contract is. But recently, the Russo brothers came out and said that it was actually Robert Downey Jr. and Kevin Feige's idea for Robert Downey Jr. to come back as Doctor Doom, and that Robert Downey Jr. is the one who initially came up with the idea, that he wanted to do it. And if he wants to play this character, maybe that'll make contract negotiations a little bit easier for Marvel Studios to bring him back after the multiverse saga is over, because it's something he might want to do. Now, that seems kind of like hopeful thinking, but I'm not necessarily thinking that his character is going to die at the end of Avengers Secret Wars the way that Thanos died at the end of Endgame. I think he could have an ending that's a little bit similar to what happened with Doctor Doom at the end of the Secret Wars comics. All right, and then the next one we have is 10 from Happy Dance 5003. This one says, "Yo, brother, love your content. After the initial shock wore off, I've kind of become obsessed with Robert Downey Jr. as Doctor Doom, and here's why. Stark was already walking the line between hero and villain. That internal conflict drove half the movies leading up to Endgame. In the end, he made the ultimate sacrifice, and Strange knew that that was the only path to victory over Thanos. Now, if Kang fears Stark/Doom, then it makes sense that he ensured that the sacred timeline led to Stark's downfall, eliminating a potential threat to his rule. But what if Stark and Doom, at least these versions, are variants of each other? This Doom just pushes the line even further, embracing a by any means necessary philosophy. That takes us to the extreme version of with great power comes great responsibility, and with ultimate power comes ultimate responsibility. This fits the Luciferian archetype and highlights a key difference between Cap and Stark. Cap's goal is to do the right thing. Stark's goal is to do the thing right. Apply that logic on a multiversal scale and you get God Emperor Doom. And just cutting in real quick, I think that's a great point because Cap is ultra principled and will always do the right thing, and Tony is definitely principled and I would say overall a good person, but you're right, he does straddle that line of what is right compared to what will save everyone.
Tony, alive and otherwise, that what we needed was a pseudo armor around the world. Remember that? Whether it impacted our precious freedoms or not, that's what we needed.
And I think that that could play a huge role in Doctor Doom's story arc in the upcoming Avengers movies, because the Russo brothers even said in that recent interview that they love doing villains who think they're the hero. And that's exactly something I've said in past videos, that I think Doctor Doom will be portrayed as a villain that actually thinks he's the hero because he's doing what he thinks needs to be done to save the multiverse. But that part of his plan also includes destroying the bulk of the multiverse and then rebuilding it into either a new sacred timeline or just a new singular universe. But anyways, getting back to your comment. As for the concern about lack of character development for this version of Doom, look how they handled Wolverine in Deadpool and Wolverine. We're getting a Logan variant with minimal setup, but as an audience, we instinctively project what we already know about him. The writers then show us what makes this version different. But my guess is it ties into an alternate universe where Hydra wins, controlling Cap, the Starks, and tipping the balance toward tyranny. Doom Stark will still fight Hydra, overthrowing them in Latveria first, setting the stage for the events to come. The main point? We don't need a massive backstory of Robert Downey Jr.'s Doom. We already have it with Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark. What we need is a clear how and why this variant differs, and then let the action take over from there. All right, bravo, sir. That's a great comment with a lot of great points. Because what you're saying could totally explain why it's not going to be a huge deal that they are introducing Doctor Doom without having a bunch of setup beforehand in the Multiverse Saga. Because if it turns out that he is a variant of Tony Stark that went down the wrong path or took some dark turn at some point in the past, perhaps because of some tragedy, then that would totally give us the backstory we need and most of what we need to know, because we would have seen where this version of Doom made a wrong turn compared to what our version of Tony from the 616 universe did in the past. So yeah, I think that's a great point all the way around. Good stuff. And then the last super thanks we have is $10 from Negative Ozane 930. And this is by far the longest super thanks comment I have ever gotten, because it literally took me 4 different screenshots to be able to get the whole thing. So I'm not going to read every single word. I'm going to have to condense it just a little bit, but we'll get to most of it. Okay, so here we go. So with everything I've learned through your videos and what I've personally gathered while rereading Jonathan Hickman's Incursion saga, which everyone should read, it's really good, this is kind of what I've gathered the plot for Doomsday will be, mixing leaks, rumors, and theories. A plot, Team Doom. Goal, find and stop the cause of the incursions by any means necessary. And that this team could include Doctor Doom, Doctor Strange, Clea, and Scarlet Witch, and also an assortment of various variants of both heroes and villains that could form Doom's personal Illuminati. And again, I'm just going to have to summarize this a little, but then basically the B plot would be that we would have the Fantastic Four, Sam Wilson's Avengers, and Bucky Barnes' Thunderbolts / Dark Avengers, all defending Earth 616 against Deadpool and Wolverine, X-Men, and the Brotherhood of Mutants from Universe 10,005, with each side trying to defend their universes from the incursions. And then he also says that the C plot of the movie could also include the Champions / Young Avengers trying to just save people on Earth from the incursions and the multiversal war, and that we could also see the Guardians of the Galaxy doing the same thing, but saving people out in space. And then to cap it all off, he basically says that at the end of the movie, we could see Doom taking on the Council of Kangs and then taking out Loki, and then after that, returning to Earth and basically taking out all parties still involved with the multiversal war, taking out the Avengers, taking out the X-Men, taking out everyone, and then taking the Quantum Bands and the Ten Rings from Kamala Khan and Shang-Chi, and using those to harness Loki and Wanda's powers to destroy the Council of Kangs and merge every universe into one, with one world under Doom, where he rules over the multiverse on Loki's former throne. And then at the very end, he says, "Sorry for the long comment. I was just curious on how much of this you agree with, or if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Love the videos. Keep it up." All right. Thank you, dude. Sorry I had to abbreviate it a little bit. It was just mighty long. But I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I've talked about this in the past. I definitely think there's a good chance that Doctor Doom's plot in the movie will revolve around him as he's trying to reach Loki on his throne at the end of time, and that characters like Doctor Strange and Clea and so on could be with him on that journey, and that the multiversal war could be happening, and we could have the Avengers battling against all these different universes. Basically, like what you said, one thing I don't think will happen is I don't think we're going to see characters like Silver Surfer involved. I think they'll save Silver Surfer until after the multiverse saga is over. And I do think we'll see Star-Lord in Avengers Doomsday, but I don't think we'll see the rest of the Guardians of the Galaxy because there just won't be room. But I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a few of the Guardians pop up as a part of Battleworld in Avengers Secret Wars. So yeah, definitely a cohesive theory that makes a lot more sense than a lot of others I've seen. So yeah, even though it was super long, I love theories like that. They're always fun to go through. And yeah, I appreciate it, man. But anyways, let's wrap this thing up at this point, because I do not know if you guys can tell, but I am totally losing my voice from talking for so long. So yeah, thank you so much for the super thanks, everyone. Really appreciate really good comments today. And remember, for those of you watching, that if you would like to leave a super thanks with a comment or a question on this video, that those really help out the channel a lot, and that I will read and respond to those in the next video. And then also, if you missed the last video, you should definitely check it out. It's a good one, all about Secret Wars, Scarlet Witch, and the Mutant Saga. Good stuff. And then lastly, if you enjoyed the video, please like and share it. That really helps out the channel a lot. And don't forget to come follow the channel on Twitter to hit me up with topic requests or just come say what's up. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, everyone, and I will be back soon.